So I'd like you to welcome you to the first session of our 12-week class on white fragility.
There's far too many of you.
For those who are part of this Zoom meeting, live recording, I want you to know that this is being recorded and it will be available and posted on the website for La Casa de Cristo Lutheran Church. So this is being recorded. Anything you say and any visual images that come up on the screen will be also available on the church website for later postings. So be aware of that. If you do not want your face shown on the screen, or if you do not want your comments heard, then you're certainly privileged not to speak, and also to just have your name and no image shown. So the question could be asked, why am I facilitating this class? I'm facilitating this class because I believe this is an opportunity for you and I to speak, because every voice that is raised against racism chips away at its power, and I believe we cannot afford to stay silent anymore. I'm both excited and a little nervous to facilitate this class together, partly because the subject of racism is really a crucial conversation. And as I've said on many occasions, as in the promos for this class, crucial conversations are conversations where the stakes are high, opinions vary, and emotions can run very strong. In a few moments, I hope to highlight a few of the points from White Fragility Chapter 1, which is entitled The Challenge of Talking to White People About Race. But I need to note here that not every Black person wants to talk to white people about race. In fact, a few years ago, after being frustrated with the way the discussion on race and racism was going in England, that it often was led by those blind people who were unwilling to ignore its legacy, a journalism named Rennie Eddie Lodge wrote a book entitled Why I Am Not Talking to White People About Race Anymore. So I see someone else coming into the room, so let me admit them right now. It's Karen. Hi, Karen. Welcome to our talk. I've already begun, so I'll just continue where I am. I was talking about Eddie Lodge. Eddie, she wrote a book entitled Why I Am No Longer Talking to White People About Race. The book really looked at the eradicated Black history, the political purpose for white dominance and whitewash feminism, and it really looked at the inextricable link between class and race. And so not everybody wants to talk to white people about racism, but it is a conversation that we need to have. So I'd like to thank you for opening your ears and your minds and your hearts to embark on this journey together. I named the class Anti-Racist Christianity, a crucial conversation on racism. The very name is suggestive, but also the book I selected to use, White Fragility, is very, very controversial. There are those who view this book as divisive and counterproductive to a conversation on race and racism. And there are those who view it as a timely and well-needed spark to a conversation that has not been had on a serious level for a long period of time. I would imagine that some white people, it might be easy to read D'Angelo's book and reject it because they can't see themselves in that picture, because they believe that they are polite in their conversation and their responses to Blacks or certain people and or certain situations connected to racism. Or maybe they can say something like, I've never done, I've never said, and I've never thought that. But over the next 12 weeks, I'm going to ask that you will please keep your mind open. Keep an open mind. Stop, read, listen, watch, notice, connect, engage, act, and reflect. I hope we can use this book as a means to engage in a serious soul-searching conversation, a conversation that we will all participate in. I've handpicked, sorry, my Siri went off a few moments ago. I handpicked a diverse group of co-presenters that for the next 11 weeks will not just engage us in an intellectual exercise. My hope and prayer is that they will challenge us to seriously examine the information that they will present, to practice some deep contemplation, and maybe even experience a little inspiration that will, with the help of God Almighty, lead us to real transformation. On the church website, you will find a link, or links rather, to additional suggested readings, documentaries, and movies on the subject of race and racism, a workbook and study guide for this class, a Google document where you can publicly share comments and/or questions. And finally, on the church website, you will find a list of the names and the bios of the 11 co-presenters I have invited to join us on this journey. In the initial video promo that I made for this class, I was seen coming out of a cave. And I suggested that engaging in a conversation about racism can feel like you're entering into a cave, which reminds me of a quote by Joseph Campbell. And the quote goes something like this: "The cave we fear to enter could possibly hold the treasure and the healing that we desperately seek. The cave we fear to enter could possibly hold the treasure and the healing that we so desperately seek." The quote really is a perfect example of the process of individuation. It's really a life process by which a person integrates parts of their self into a whole. It's acknowledging the fact that the individual must engage all aspects of who they are, even those which they fear. Some of Carl Jung, other quotes that echoes this kind of sensibility, it says that a person's task is to become conscious of the contents that press upward from the unconscious. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Another quote that kind of jars this image in my mind is: to confront a person with their own shadows is to show them their own light. And a final quote that I really love is: one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but one becomes enlightened by making the darkness conscious. These 12 weeks really present for us an opportunity to continue to either continue the same dialogue around race or to change the conversation. That is what I believe we're presented with here, an opportunity to continue the same dialogue around race, or to change the conversation from, yes, racism is bad, but it doesn't affect me, to how am I participating in a dehumanizing institution? What does my faith say about my participation in race and racism in America? What am I willing to do about this? Because every voice raised against racism really chips away at its power. And I believe we can ill afford to be silent anymore. So let's briefly begin to look at chapter 1. Chapter 1, the challenges of talking to white people about race and racism. Many of us are probably aware of the fact that Congressman John Lewis died recently. And in celebrating his life, the media showed the march in which he was beaten by police and attacked by police dogs. And some white people watching then, and maybe most or some white people watching now, probably shook their heads at the brutality of the scene. Most white people would probably agree that it was motivated by racism and motivated by hatred. But how many white people would be likely to identify with the police or approve of the police's actions? How many would recognize that such conduct was not right then, and such conduct is not right now? How many could conclude or would conclude, we're glad that we are not that kind of racist? On page 4 of chapter 1 in the book, the author says that if we try to talk openly and honestly about race, most white people respond with silence, defensiveness, and pushback. And I will acknowledge to you today that when I first picked up this book to read, I read to chapter 3, and it was so disturbing for me as a Black man that I had to put this book aside for several days before I could continue with chapter 4 and the subsequent chapters. So it would be interesting to me to know what was the experience of the white participants in this class who actually picked up the book, who actually invested the time, who actually read the chapters. What was your initial reaction? How did you experience this book as you were reading it? Because the author says that most white people would respond with silence, defensiveness, and pushback. For instance, if I ask the whites participating in this class, or maybe those who are part of this recording today, whether you are or have ever been racist, what do you think the response would be? Have you ever been racist? You see, as long as racism is only seen as something that other people who are less intelligent or less informed do, it's easier to ignore the possibility that racism is a lot more common than we are willing to admit. Sometimes examples of segregation in schools and neighborhoods and ghettos in large cities where people of poverty and culture live separately, cut off from resources and opportunities, are really considered as facts of living, having nothing to do with race or systemic racism, but rather are mere obstacles that can be overcome if Black people only got a job, worked hard, and achieved the American dream. But D'Angelo says on page 9 of chapter 1 that white people are convinced that they are not a part of the problem because they often limit the definition of racism to intentional acts of racial discrimination and hatred committed by immoral or ignorant people. There was a cartoon figure during World War II called Pogo. And in one famous cartoon, Pogo says, "We have found the enemy, and he is us." Even the belief by many white people that they treat or see everyone as equal is suspect because often their interaction with other races is so limited. That's a statement directly from the book. So my question to the white participants in this class and those who might be a part of the recording for today, how many Black friends do you have? How many Black neighbors do you have? I'm not talking about coworkers. I'm not talking about employees, but I'm talking about friends that you talk to, that you hang out with, that you would invite to your home and share a meal with on a regular basis. How many Black friends do you have? You see, the danger comes about when white people convince themselves that as long as they are not personally engaging in racist beliefs or behaviors, the problem belongs to others, and they share no responsibility or blame. Individualism is one of the many hot points raised by D'Angelo in chapter 1. And individualism, she says, creates and communicates, reproduces, and reinforces the concept that each of us is a unique individual, and our group membership, such as race and class or gender, are really irrelevant to our opportunities. I'm okay, so if there's a problem, it's not my fault. It's basically what individualism says, and claims that there are no intrinsic barriers to success and failure. And it's not a consequence of social structures, but comes from individual character. That's on page 10 of chapter 1. And according to this idea of individualism, race then becomes irrelevant. But the question that we could ask is, are opportunities in America really distributed equally along the lines of race, along the lines of class, and even along the lines of gender? We love the feel-good stories about the disadvantaged child who grew up from the hood, whose father abandoned the family. And I say father because America has this love-hate relationship with Black men, and for the most part, a lot of Black men in many white communities are simply viewed as sperm donors, drug addicts, thieves, hoodlums, thugs, gangbangers. So we love those feel-good stories about the disadvantaged child who grew up in the hood with an abandoned father and grew up and went on to college and became successful. That kind of pulled her or his self up by their own bootstraps. And so this ties into that concept by D'Angelo, that individualism. This person fulfilled the American dream, and if they can do it, anybody can do it. Race doesn't matter. Racism doesn't matter. And these stories really affirm for us our belief that America really is a land of opportunity, and that the playing field is level and equal for all people, regardless of race, regardless of gender. But can we really say that unity exists if the rule is every man or woman for him or herself? Individualism. And I sadly say, with regards to the issue of individualism, we even find that sneaking into the church at times. I mean, I'm a pastor, so I have to weave in those elements of theology and church into this presentation, because how often in the church it's not our relationship with God is viewed as my personal relationship with God. I found Jesus. I got saved. It's not a relationship that is nurtured and developed in community, but it's my relationship with God. But I would argue that in order for this relationship, this vertical relationship with God and humankind to exist, we need the horizontal relationship with each other. And that's where the cross comes into play. It's not only my relationship with God, but it's my relationship with others that is equally as important. And so on page 11 and 12, she says, right now, you may be thinking all the ways that you are different. And here she's speaking to white people who are reading this book and has listened to or read all of these lists of things that really can be jarring to hear, because she's right in your face saying this is reality. So you've listened to all of these things and you're probably thinking, according to the author, that you're different. You're different than other white people. And if the author, just knew you, that you would see how different of a white person I am. You had sacrificed and you had survived and you had succeeded. And she said, I would know that you are not a racist. The individualism. The point of this discussion, though, is to help us see more detail or look more detail in the picture of American life so that we can see that even if you have not done any racially motivated acts or thoughts, the systemic racism in America puts Blacks and people of color at a huge disadvantage. Schools funding that are based on local tax base. I hope that my co-presenter, Dr. Christine Mahoney, will speak to that issue, as she is a former school superintendent. Inequalities in school facilities and resources, including teachers, because of unequal funding for poorer neighborhoods. Institutional biases in the justice system, from police through the courts, may be invisible to most white people, but have a real impact on Black people, especially Black men. And I hope that my guest for chapter 2, attorney Don Stevens, will speak to this subject. The biases in the justice system, the biases in the police system, the biases in the court system that really are invisible to most white people, but have a real impact on people of color, particularly Black men. On page 14, the author states that the racial status quo is comfortable for white people, and we will not move forward if we remain uncomfortable. The key to moving forward is what we do with our discomfort. And she's speaking about what white people do with their discomfort. How uncomfortable are you or were you when you read this book? And then the question becomes, what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with that? We can start the conversation by asking, why does it unsettle you? Why does this conversation unsettle you as a white person? What would it mean for you if everything that D'Angelo says in this book is actually true? What would that mean for you as a white person? How does this lens change your understanding of racial dynamics? How can your unease help reveal the unexamined assumptions that you have been making as a white person? Is it possible that because you're white, there's some racial dynamics that you can't see? Are you willing to consider that possibility? And if not, why not? That's just a brief overview of chapter 1. And as I mentioned, there are opportunities on the church website for us to engage in posting comments and asking questions, and also just supporting and loving and caring for each other on this 12-week journey. There's a study guide on there that you can choose to download or use in a small group setting to continue this discussion on racism. And my prayer is that you would open up your hearts and open up your minds to explore the possibility. My prayer for, especially for people of faith who will join in this discussion, that you will allow the Holy Spirit to hold a mirror in front of you and say, the Holy Spirit can say, do you see what I see? In the words of the Christmas song. For those who are with us in this recording, I would invite you at this time to unmute if you would like to offer some insights or some comments, or maybe we can exchange some question and answers for the remaining 6 or 7 minutes that we have for this recording. I see that Dr. Mahoney has unmuted herself, so I will give her an opportunity to speak now. Dr. Mahoney?
Good morning again, and good morning to everyone who is participating. Thank you for this opportunity. I read through the book. I opened it up the first day I purchased it. I read the introduction and the framework that was laid out, and I thought, you know, I personally need to do some healing around this particular subject matter. And so I read the book from that perspective. And it was my good fortune that as I read from cover to cover, that I found in each chapter something that helped to explain one or more or several experiences that I've had since I've been in the United States of America. I grew up in the West Indies, and I've lived in Jamaica. I've lived in the Virgin Islands and St. Croix and St. Thomas. I've lived in Connecticut and in the city of Hartford and in the suburbs. As an educator, I taught in Hartford and also in the suburbs. I attended college in the Virgin Islands, in the US Virgin Islands, and also in Connecticut. And in those instances, I can recall that except for my experience in the Virgin Islands, all the other institutions I attended were predominantly people who were white, and there were very few people who were people of color. And what we always tend to find, or I always tend to notice, was that people tended to stay together in their group where they feel comfortable. So we found that the whites tend to stay together and the people of color tend to stay together. But make no mistake, that does not mean that there was solidarity necessarily in each group. What I also found, which I found very interesting, was that among the white individuals, there were these there were these differences, and it wasn't about color in that particular circumstance. It was about your class. It was about economics. It was about, you know, wealth, and it was about your privilege. And it was about your name. What was your last name? Who were you connected to? I found on the other side that, again, it wasn't so much about the shade of brown that you were. What I found was that people tended to stay together according to ethnicity. And right within that, you also saw ranks of privilege and class and economics. So as I read through the book, I began to understand why what I lived through and observed was really happening. It really helped to frame for me my developing understanding of why interpersonal relationships are the way they are. It became even more profound for me when I thought about my working experience. I found I had no hesitation about applying for a job as an educator in any school district. Because for me, it wasn't about the color. It was for me an opportunity to have a job fundamentally, but also an opportunity for me to experience something outside of my familiar zone. And so I approached each of those opportunities from that perspective. And unfortunately, my perspective, that perspective, as open as it was, it wasn't enough. There were still things that I just could not understand. For example, I had a comment when I went to work in a city. It's predominantly people of color, mixed races, mixed, you know, ethnicities. I was told, and it still boggles my mind, I was told that I was not Black enough. I still don't.
Dr. Mahoney, Dr. Mahoney,
yes.
I'm going to let that be a cliffhanger right there, because we're running out of time. We have probably a minute and a half. And which session are you leading, Dr. Mahoney?
Well, I will be leading the chapter 10.
Chapter 10. But you can join, you'll be joining us infrequently as your schedule allows. And I would love for you to continue the conversation and the story, but not being Black enough. Oh my God.
Yes.
Did you speak white? Did you speak white?
I think I spoke perfect English.
Oh, okay. So
I was educated, and I talked to everybody, and they just couldn't understand that.
Okay.
And I couldn't understand why it was a problem.
So we're going to end our session today with that not being Black enough, and but we really want you to consider joining us for subsequent lessons. I mean, you don't have to wait till chapter 10 to hear Dr. Mahoney again, or to offer your input on this discussion. You can go on the Google document and ask questions or make comments. But I do want to thank you for being a part of this inaugural conversation on racism, anti-racist Christianity, a crucial conversation on racism. And I hope you will join us again next week as we look at chapter 2. God bless you, and thank you for joining us.